Welcome to My View from the Piano Bench. We do this typically on Wednesday evenings, along with Piano for My Friends on Thursday evenings. And my apologies that this was not uploaded in time for Wednesday evening. So we're doing this on Thursday, and I'm glad it worked out that way. I'll explain in a minute. Thank you to those of you who support and encourage me through the links you'll find on the support page of my website, and you'll see a link to that page in the video description. Thank you so much. This, in effect, sponsors these videos that are not monetized in any other way. And thank you for your consideration, if you would, to drop in a tip jar on occasion, or with the Patreon option, which is monthly. On a schedule, and then you'll receive exclusive content from me, often video content, as a thank you. So last night I had a really nice gig, and it is exactly at the time that this video would have run, and I was not able to get this done before. I made an attempt at it. I was not satisfied with it, and I knew I was going to have to try to do this today. But the circumstance last night really provides the basis for, I think, something that I can talk about, if not eloquently, from the depths of my experience and perspective. So I'm calling this Navigating a Changing Landscape. And in general, or as a general topic, I've talked about this many times, which is the changing bullseye in particular the senior citizen culture that in the 90s, especially in the 90s, but also in the early 2000s, and before the 90s, absolutely. What I do, or what my center of gravity is, was bullseye for the senior citizen culture. And I've mentioned one of the measuring sticks of this is in Alzheimer's patients. I'm going to qualify this and say, and this is now things I learned as a music therapist. I'm going to qualify this and say that my perspective on this is that even though this is something that you do in dementia care, Alzheimer's care, it's a kind of general concept that I go with, and it works, which is that the strongest memories that you retain are college years. They're not early childhood years. And of course, people who don't have memory loss remember everything, but there's the deep embeddedness of, like, when you were 20 years old, say, when you become a senior citizen. That's, you find that right away. That hits you right here. And back in the 90s, let's say someone was, 75 years old. They would have been born, let me see if I can do math, probably not, between like 1915 and 1920. That would put their college age years between 1935 and 1940. Oh my goodness. That's actually the era of popular music that I came in on, if you measure it by the lifespan of the Benny Goodman Trio. And I say the Benny Goodman Trio because that was the group, the three musicians, that Joe McGeary plied me with every recording of them ever when he walked into Trenton Regional High School one day, realizing that he had targeted me to play this music because I kind of was there anyway in my conception, but I was kind of ignorant, or very ignorant, or unschooled. So I brought all those records home. And I think the Benny Goodman Trio was formed in 1935. And I think recorded through 38 maybe. or 34 to 37, or 34 to 39, or 33 to 30. But anyway, right in that range. So that was perfect. Of course, it's no longer perfect. In fact, it's pretty much no longer viable, or marginally viable. And what all the musicians really who play this culture of music have learned at this point, and sad to me that some of them, if not many of them, have learned it suddenly and all at once and recently, that the demographic has shifted, and you can still play that music, but you can't live in 1938 or 1942. Not with like baby boomers coming up and into retirement communities. So I've made adjustments along the way. Now, last night's gig was a really pointed, and I don't want to say full circle, but like feels like, I feel like there is the chapter 2 that I have initiated that the door is opening to, and I'll explain. Which has nothing to do with anything. So when I kind of fell into senior citizen community work, which technically when I fell into it was as an entertainer, but I fell into it in a path or with an emphasis that would lead me to music therapy. In fact, and I've told this story before, the first facility that I went to, that I performed at, that I had no idea what I was doing when I went there. None. In terms of the population. I just knew the tunes, right? But I had been observed as being able to handle the challenges and navigate and connect in a way that their music therapists, if they happened to be losing that week, could do. And I was offered that contract, and that's what started everything. That facility, Cokesbury Village in Hockessin, Delaware, was part of a 4-facility group at the time. They've since been absorbed into a larger senior group, and that initial group, Peninsula United Methodist Homes, no longer exists. There were 4 facilities. And of course, what happened with the success I was having at the first facility was immediately, bang, 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 the other facilities picked me up. I didn't solicit them. One of them took longer because it was further away. And one of those 4 facilities is the retirement community here in Chestertown, the area in which I live and have lived for now 30 years. And I was introduced to Chestertown because of a referral. Another community that I was introduced to, the first one I actually regularly contracted at, and I'm not sure how this worked because I did start at Cokesbury Village and Methodist Country House, now called Country House, in Greenville, Delaware, just outside of Wilmington, as is Cokesbury. Had me come over, and it was either 93 or 94, I'm not sure which, 93 probably, that I began playing for them once a month. And now, by the time I was board certified as a music therapist in 1997, initially, I took that deeper and, was billing myself at that point as a music therapist. I was not before that, but still in that realm for sure. And for about 15 years, I went to this facility once a month. I've said that I've had about 30 facilities in that very busy period, that 10 years where I was really to the wall with it. 30 facilities, most of them probably continuing care communities, meaning You go there ideally when you're, independent. And then if you need the care as time goes on, either assisted living, which is like you need help but not necessarily medical help, or nursing care or skilled nursing care, you're covered. And that's a big draw for that. So you have all the populations. 30 of those communities over 4 states, a wide geographic area, and contracts at least once a month with all of them. And man, was that something to manage. Now with Country House, when I went there, this is now why I say in that period I did 400 to 600 gigs a year, depending on how you count them. For Country House, it evolved quickly that I would go first to the health center, I think, and then to the assisted living, and then I would end up in independent living. I would do concerts for them on occasion, but the once a month thing was me playing in their dining room in the kind of cocktail hour before dinner, and it was a little event every month, and it was one of those steady things, and it was just part of my routine. When it became obvious, there were other factors involved, but the underlying condition was it became obvious to me, 10, 15 years ago, or 15, that I was losing the culture. I was anticipating it, and what I did was like less relevant, but also, and I said that was a primary thing. It was one of the things. I was also shifting internally in terms of moving more into public performance, and moving away from music therapy, because to me, the music therapy work was centered on me knowing that culture. And although I loved the work, I never, self-identified as a music therapist in a general sense, where, I learned the music of all the cultures and I have all the populations, and it was a specific thing. I keep my certification, and I do the continuing education, and I read up on other aspects of music therapy, but for me it was a specific thing. So it was moving on for me, and then I decided, and I'm not sure if Country House was a part of this or not, but it was like, okay, it was time to just pretty much pull the plug. And I stopped going to any senior communities except for the community here in Chestertown and Heron Point. So it's been about 15 years since I've been to Methodist Country House. Now, back in the day when I was doing it, I would have a few facilities that I would go to with Beth McDonald, my friend that I've known for 20 years, in like the Peggy Lee vein. And most all that I did was solo piano, but it's always nice to work with a singer, right? And I'm still doing some of that with Beth. We're kind of reviving that, but also now with Sharon Sable. And one aspect of this is that in the post big band era culture, the emphasis is much more on the vocalist. That's actually a subject. Let me write that down. Instrumental to vocal, big band to contemporary rock. So I won't talk a whole lot about it now. Let's see if I can make it make sense. But you've heard me talk about it, that for a number of reasons, popular music became vocal centric. And it wasn't in the big band era. In the big band era, instrumentalists got the top billing. And if the singer was billed at all, it was in small print underneath. Now, the one who came up in the big bands who really started to change that was Frank Sinatra. And prior to him being Crosby, he had his own billing. But then after that, it was the singers, and now the instrumentalists are just who, what, you know, and that's the culture, and it's what it is, and that's all cool. Meaning that as I start to get back into senior facilities, going in with a vocalist is much cleaner, much easier to hold and connect with this changing demographic with a vocalist. I mean, it was always a little bit challenging, but when you had a culture that came up where instrumental music was, so prominent, it was easier to be just an instrumentalist. So hopefully that makes sense. So the picture I'm painting now is that Sharon and I, as well as Beth and I, have determined in the current landscape that we're going to be working our way back into doing some senior facilities. And I'm not approaching senior facilities on my own. And I'm going to go as an accompanist, and that's the right thing to do. So Sharon got the lead. Actually, she was contacted by Methodist Country House. And I'm like, this is going to be really cool, because I hadn't been there in 15 years. Right? But that was like an important part of what I did. That was there at the beginning. There are multiple YouTube videos, I'm sure. One I can think of right now of Embraceable You that were taken, that I posted back when I was posting like crazy, which I started in 2007. That's when I opened my YouTube channel. And in 2007, I was still, it was getting in the tail end, but I was still doing a zillion senior communities. After a few years is when it's when it started to fade away. And going back there, I could say all kind of things. So back when I was doing music therapy stuff and started in the 90s, and when I had a solo group, or when I played solo, which is every time, it has been forever since forever that I played When You're Smiling like that, just as a tune, and did a little solo on it, and that's how I would open every program, especially every music therapy related program. Every one, I would always start with When You're Smiling. I'd always end with Irving Berlin's Holt. I would not consider playing When You're Smiling these days on any sort of institutional level. Wow, as a routine. Maybe as a specialty tune in the right occasion, but very few people, even in senior communities, even nursing care, when you're smiling, is not going to be center of gravity. Maybe a very few. It's all moved on, right? So we did this gig last night, but Sharon wanted to see the space because it was near her house, and I went with her. We had a rehearsal to do anyway, and since that time, and I've observed this at Heron Point. I'm sorry, I started this sentence. Now I'm starting this one. A company had purchased the 4 facilities, the 4 PUMH facilities, and that's ACT Senior Living, ACTS. I'm not sure what that stands for. Somebody asked me yesterday. And I was aware of that because of my relationship with Heron Point. And it was something that needed to happen. And I learned last night that the attitude there was the same as Heron Point. People weren't happy about it until they saw, the positive changes, and then the residents were happy about it, because of course this is their home. This is what they know, and if you're gonna mess with my house, my place, right? But what I was not prepared for when I went with Sharon to observe the space, because I knew the room we were playing in, I remember it well, was how much it changed. Because Heron Point hasn't changed much, and I learned yesterday why, or recently learned why. Because that's a Delaware group, and this is Maryland, and there's different regulations, and they couldn't do the stuff here. So anyway, I get there, and it's like, what in the... I did expect that there'd be a guardhouse, that would, because they have it at Heron Point, and that's new. I go in there, and I walk in the front door, and the whole facility has been extended out toward the front, and there's all this stuff and bar area, and they just built a brand new theater that we didn't get to use last night. It's opening in a few weeks, and all this stuff out front. And I'm like, wow, I used to come in way over there, pointing to the back. We finally get to the hallway where I'm familiar with. Like, oh, okay, now I know where the men's room is. I know where the chapel is. Okay? But not only has the exterior circumstances moved on, I'm well aware that the cultural shift has happened too. And what I guess I intended to talk about, and I'm taking a long time leading up to it, but I never know what I'm going to say, and I just let myself go, and usually it works out okay, is how I'm handling the culture shift. Because of course, even if I cut myself off from, having senior communities as sort of my anchor in terms of my gigging, I've still been involved with Heron Point, and I'm still navigating it there, because I do everything there at Heron Point that you can imagine that a piano player might do, and then some. I've been going there. Next year will be 30 years. I've been going to Heron Point. Crazy. And, there's lots of love there. Lots of relationships I have, lots of long-standing connections. So let's do some math first. So let's up the age. Let's say 85 instead of 75. Because 85 is probably more of a median age. Maybe even higher, but actually depends. There are senior communities where, you have a lot of younger, like early 70s residents that come in, way different, and the center of gravity is to them. There are other communities where, there aren't a lot of younger people, and all the people who were there are like in their 90s. and that kind of community, you could still have like, big band stuff as kind of center of gravity, but it's not going to last much longer to the extent it's still there. So let's say 85. I can say 90, but let's say 85, or at least 83, so it makes it easier for me to do math. If somebody is 83, they would have been born in 1940. So then let's make 1938. Now this is, and see how this math works? The math is not my brain doesn't work that way. I do math esoterically. It's like whatever this new math is probably how my brain thinks. I'm not aware. But anyhow, 1938 would be when somebody who was 85 was born in 2023. 1938, back when I started all this, was bullseye for the culture of college years. So this whole generation, bang, right? So if you were born in 1938, you were 20 years old in 1958. Oh my goodness. So let's now broaden this out and say bullseye age range, 50s and 60s. 50s and 60s is you are in the rock and roll era. Now for me, and I know like music historians, especially in the future, are going to divide this up a lot more. But for me, the relevant cultural shift was when rock and roll happened. There's another very significant shift to digital music that's more recent that would affect me if I were in the contemporary culture of music, but I'm not, and I'm pretty ignorant of that. But 60 years from now, that's going to be in the same category of people who are like programming for seniors and stuff as what I'm talking about, which is when rock and roll came along. And in this particular case, it was a seismic cultural shift. It's not that, people's musical preferences in terms of styles just evolved. When rock and roll came along, it was this to conventions and establishment and authority and on all of that. That's all reflected in the music, and all of the conservative culture, religious conservatism, Christian fundamentalism backlash, against rock music was founded in reality. Really, it's like this is rebel stuff, right? But it became the thing. Now, initially, it was just a thing for young people, and older people had their thing, and that was great for me because even into the 70s, as a teenager, I was starting to watch Johnny Carson. And I've told you the story of how I discovered Dave McKenna on the Merv Griffin show in like 1979. So like into the 80s, all this existed, but all of those shows that had big bands and featured big band era music, they were happening into the 80s, and their audience was older, right? And because that audience was still vital, and I was participating in that culture as a younger person, which bites me in the butt a little bit now, but also without that I wouldn't be who I am and really where I am. So it's all good, and I don't regret anything. So you had the pop culture, and you had the golden oldies culture. Oldies at that point was still like big band era, until it wasn't anymore. And I remember 20 years ago or so, there was still a couple of radio stations that featured the old era music. And if not necessarily just big bands, but like the early 50s, before rock and roll, the Dean Martins and the Frank Sinatra. The Sinatra thing is kind of the one thing that still kind of hangs on. because Sinatra like pulled that forward into the current era, and Tony Bennett certainly did as well. But uh, Tony, as much of an influence as Tony Bennett had, I would still say that Frank Sinatra was the cultural phenomenon that just plowed ahead. You know, you had these, who was it, Sid Mark or somebody who had this syndicated Sinatra show that either still exists or ended not long ago. Uh, and you had like Sinatra Day on certain radio stations. There was a talk station in Philly that turned Sinatra on the weekends, you know, until some years ago, but not that long ago. I didn't never encountered that with Tony Bennett. There was no like Tony Bennett Day. It was, you know, Sinatra. So that still kind of lives on to some extent. But the whole point of it is that while that was happening in the 70s and 80s, you know, and I was a teenager in the 70s, but I saw what was coming, you know, decades away. I didn't have to worry about it, but I knew it would be here. So it didn't creep up on me and surprise me. You know, I watched The Burglar through the you know, a what do you call it? Security camera, right? And eventually the burglar gets in the house, and eventually the burglar, in this case, the burglar doesn't steal the furniture. It replaces the furniture with things that you wouldn't have chosen that you don't necessarily like, you know. But it's like, I knew it was coming. And when I was working in music therapy in the 90s, my stock line is that, you know, all the people here, they all grew up in homes where the mother, pretty much, or somebody played piano. And they all would gather around the piano. The piano wasn't their culture per se, necessarily, but the really older music was their parents' culture, right? And the piano was center. I said, in 15, 20 years from now, and this is how I sort of joked about it, so they're not going to be gathered around the piano. They're going to be gathered around the guitar, singing "We All Live in the Yellow Submarine." But what I was doing the math. That at that point, the era of the Beatles was going to be that era that you target. And here we are, right? And, you know, I kind of left while the getting's good. But in recent years, and the Piano for My Friends, formerly live stream, now a weekly video, and what the related ones I did before that led up to it, are places for me to make sure, you know, that I keep pushing out tunes from like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you know, which keeps me relevant with, you know, people my age and older. See, I'm 63, right? So I can look back and I can sort of test this memory theory on myself, you know, and yeah, on the bus as a senior in high school, kids are playing Elton John, Philadelphia Freedom. I remember hearing that all the time. Of course, I grew up in the New Jersey suburbs of Philadelphia. Yo, hey, you, Philly. Yeah, I would tell people when I was in different parts of the country who had never been to Philadelphia, watch the Rocky movies. That'll tell you what you need to know. I grew up right across the river from South Philly, and what I called the South Jersey annex of South Philadelphia, man. Yeah. Actually, I'm going to be watching the Eagles game tonight. So that little piece is still sort of attached. Yeah, because Eagles are on Thursday night football. Of course, this is supposed to be Wednesday, but I'm posting this on Thursday. But the point is that I've been, you know, not panicking now, but just sort of preparing and bringing Sharon into this realm now. It's like, okay, we are going to have, and when I perform with anybody in senior communities, I have a monthly series at Heron Point where, and I've had this for years now, where I bring a guest that I've had for one of my mainstay shows to Heron Point. And when I even when I started it, I could in 2017 or 18 maybe there, uh, I could lay harder on the older tunes, less now. So like when I had Paul Mediri come over with Vibes, we I had him work up the Herb Alpert thing, Spanish Flea, which also happened to be theme music on the dating game. Remember? Right? Uh, and of course, now I can go back into my own memories, and it's like, yeah, man. And I will probably, hopefully not, but I mean, if I ever have like memory impairment down the road, I'll probably always know that tune because that's the bullseye period, right? In terms of long-term memory. And the other one I voiced it up on Paul. Like I Dream a Genie thing. You just find things from that era. They don't have to be like things that were popular or like the most popular song. It just has to be things that touch the memories. And I say foisted upon Paul. We had fun with it, but the point is that I was steering that way. So with Sharon now, and the same deal with Beth. There's a YouTube video on her channel, but you can just search our two names. That she made an amalgam when I had her at Heron Point not that long ago. That includes now I can't remember, but well, the Leonard Cohen Hallelujah and Peggy Lee. Ain't We Got Fun, right? So like put those two together, and what does that represent? That represents that you're, casting the net broadly, and you can always go back and do older stuff, and a lot of people remember them and appreciate it, and it's fun. You just can't live there. If I were doing a sing along today, I would be playing no tunes that I played when I had to play for sing-alongs at the Showboat in Atlantic City. I've told you that story. That would have been 93. Yeah, this is 30 years later. Completely different culture. So I pulled out the list we went from last night because Sharon and I are similarly inclined to, script, shows. And we started on the older side. We ended in the newer, but newer means 70s in this case. And it's really not necessary in senior communities, in my view, to go well into the 70s, but you can. 60s, yeah. So when we look at the tunes on our list, we deviated from this, but I mean. Yeah, It's a Good Day, which is a tune that we worked up when I did the show at not Heron Point, at the Mainstay, my first Friday show with Sharon and Beth together. If you haven't seen that show, by the way, you can go to the Mainstay Live Streams YouTube channel and watch that show. That was a really neat show. The premise was, what if Peggy Lee and Blossom Dearie shared a stage? Okay. And it gave me the chance to bring my two very good friends in the same space, and they became fast friends immediately. And that was the first time they performed together, and they only met one other time for a short rehearsal. And you can actually watch that dynamic happening in the show, which is kind of not kind of, it's one of the things that makes that show special. If you haven't seen it, take a look at it. And you can just search their two names, Sharon Sable, which is her performance name, and Beth McDonald, which is her performance name. And that's going to be the only video that brings both of them together. I brought that up because this tune they did as a duo, which is really, really kind of cool. And then what did we do after that? Comes Love, which younger people know that if they do because of Postmodern Jukebox. Yeah, I didn't really think about this, but yeah, Postmodern Jukebox is in the category of like movies that use old standards and make younger people aware of them. I always use the example of Harry Connick Jr. singing "It Had to Be You," and when Harry met Sally. Whatever, all kind of examples. Look, Cab Calloway did something in one of the Blues Brothers movies, yada 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 yada. But that's all Billie Holiday tune. And then oh, this was embarrassing. I don't know that I've said this to Sharon in a long time, but she knows by experience, and I'll say this to people who the first time I work with them, I'm allowed one brain fart a gay. Keep that in mind. So my brain fart last night was La Vie en Rose was the one tune I didn't have to chart pulled. Yeah, and I don't need to chart for some of these tunes. Especially solo, but for Sharon's charts, because they're written a lot of them by her husband, and they harmonically go places that I might not think of or remember to do, because I'll do other things. It's always good for me to look at it if other musicians are, so we're playing the same thing. I don't need to do that solo, but I put them in front of me anyway. It's helpful. But I didn't pull. I don't actually have in my stack of her charts La Vie en Rose, but everybody knows that tune, and I played the tune. And I said to myself, yeah, her key's F, that's right. And I'm not going to disrupt things by asking her what the key is, And I started in F, and then she stared at me. Joe, I don't think that's my key. And we made fun of it, Her key's G, and now I can kind of remember that her lead sheet said G. So, that was my brain fart, And so we were staying in that older era, which is fine. Well, we were in there up until that point. It would have been less fine if that's all we did. The residents would have still enjoyed it, but some of them in particular, we wouldn't have reached them on a deeper level unless we shifted. The one thing I wanted to say, let's stick a parenthesis in here that I forgot about, don't want to forget again, was what was really cool is that one of the residents who has been there for 16 years, and I say it's 15 years since I've been the country house, maybe it's 13 or 14, I don't know, but she recognized my name because she was always in the dining room in that area, off the dining room where I would play once a month. So I was one of the people that she would make sure she saw every month. And it was nice to come back and still feel like I had a little bit of a connection. I didn't expect to know anybody. But of course Sharon and I both have a whole bunch of new friends now after last night. But it was cool to feel that connection was still there. Because I can picture her right now, so I wanted to say that. But after we did a Blossom Dearie tune, we made the shift, And from that point on, until the last tune, which was I Wish You Love, we were playing music of another era than I would have played in the 90s. What did we do? Pure Imagination. Sharon sings it in the key that I can't, I'd have to look at it to play it, but. Which is not necessarily like a pop tune that you would, that wouldn't be a tune that you would program because it was culturally relevant. It's just it's a cool tune, and of course people know it. But here you go. This you're getting the Patsy Cline. That would be mid-50s, right? And now that's 30 years, 20 years. Well, I can't do math. After 1935. So in the 90s, in 1996, so 1996, which was the year before I was formally certified as a music therapist, but I was well on my way to it. I was, augmenting my education. I was getting that done. So I was pretty much doing it in 96. And I think I prescribed, there was this company, I don't know if they still exist, Elder Song. And I would get some of their material. And they would have comprehensive list, which I have since made for myself, although I don't update it so much anymore, of every year, like what tunes were popular, right? And so in their like magazine or newsletter or whatever, he said, 60 years ago, 1936, right? So now think about the significance of 60 years in senior work. That's going to be 80 years old. You're 20. Perfect. And I can't think of a more center of gravity year for that large part of my life where I focused exclusively on that than 1936. All the tunes that I remember, like Stamina to the Savoy. Right, Goody Goody. Now, both of those are reasonably popular tunes, but not like big hit parade stuff, right? But they would have been completely recognizable to everybody in the senior world in 1996. If I played this for those two tunes for a senior population now, I would get blank stares from some of them. Huh? Now, of course, there are people, and if we're talking about independent, high functioning people who don't have those kind of issues, they're going to remember everything. And people knew tunes that came before. We all know tunes that predate us. So people will know those tunes, a lot of them, but they're not going to move them. Patsy Cline's for today going to go a lot deeper because that's like I said, 56. Actually, I wasn't considering this. So 1956, 1936, that's the target, right? So to hit the target in 1996, I would play Stomp of the Savoy or Goody Goody, and however many other tunes. Zillions of them were 36, so I can't recall specifically. I could circle the cup and give you lots of 30s tunes, but let me just use those two. So 1956, Crazy, right? If I would have played Crazy in 1996, anybody who had memory deficits pretty much was going to stare at me. In fact, I remember knowing exactly where that line was back in the day when I was doing this. Where I could play a song from 1942 for a group. Everybody was with me. I get to 45, 46, 47. Right around there, I would play a tune and people wouldn't participate. I mean, it was whack. It was right there. So you kind of, you could see that line move. Now, of course, we're all the way over here and I'm looking at the back edge, which is much more of a fraying edge. And the front edge is much more of a sharp edge. Either they remember it or they don't. And it just like crept up each year. It was very interesting. Now, a very relevant thing for senior culture now is the bossa nova era. In fact, our host, who introduced us, made that as a request. We were going to do it anyway. Bang. Of course, 1962. Perfect. Among the facilities that I had that was still going to when I pulled the plug was one that my parents actually lived at the end, and that was strictly coincidence. I was already well established at this facility outside of Baltimore when they moved there, and that was one where every month they had 6 different units, 6 different communities for healthcare. And I would spend, and this was actually a nightmare for me to keep my schedule because I only had 30 minutes. I had to go 30 minutes up one side and down the other. And of course, when you do a program or something, you don't just walk out the door. You talk to people. You don't just walk in and go. And I would get behind, and that a little bit, even 5 minutes, and that wasn't working for some people. That was a mess. But anyway, that facility. Why am I talking? Oh, because there was a resident there who was friends with my dad, but I knew what her favorite song was. Wave, Joe Beam tune. Now, this was actually, at the time, a little too far forward to be in the long-term memory bank thing. But, she was independent, she was fine, and that was like her thing, and her husband would dance to that or whatever. So that to me was a foretelling of, okay, we're coming up on when Joe Beam is going to be relevant. And it absolutely is now. Actually, 2 Joe Beam tunes we did. And now the subject of, Sharon plays it in D. My example of the whole thing, the Beatles. Yeah, so right now for these communities, we'll pull out 1 Beatles tune and 1 James Taylor tune that Sharon really likes. And the bottom line of this is that this was absolutely bullseye. And, Sharon takes it deep. Hopefully I take it deep. And it's a given that, if we work out a little bit, both with Sharon and with Beth, we can develop over time a network of senior communities, which I think in Sharon's mind, well, because mine, because it's a, I don't want to say business, but it is of course business. It's like we're going to build that up. Now I walked away from that, but I feel, especially going in with vocalists, equipped to walk back in with this revised game plan. And the cool thing about independent living, not really talking about healthcare or doing music therapy work or anything, although that continues to intrigue me, and I'm probably going to sign up for like $100 a month, uh, in addition to like dues that pay as a music therapist. All this stuff's going to cost me money. I don't make money in music therapy, but there's this continuing education site that it's intriguing what they offer, and I'm going to do that for a while to get ahead on my continuing education courses. But I'm still intrigued by it all. But just the idea of doing independent communities, particularly ones that can afford nice entertainment. Yeah, you wind up giving yourself gigs during the week, which is what you want. Now, one of the things that has had me not look in the rearview mirror before now about senior communities was that they are a closed thing. It's like it's not really public stuff. Like you do a concert in a senior community, you're doing it for them. You don't get this. You don't really add them to your mailing list because they're gonna just go to events right there. You just develop with that community. It's not part of your larger global kind of thing. But it's more like you really have nice, beautiful gigs. You can easily during the week, which you can have otherwise. But it's like so. The whole bottom line of this is, it kind of feels like a retool and a re-entry for me. And who knows? Maybe I'll whip out a guitar, learn a bunch of Beatles tunes, and go back in music therapy as my retirement gig. I don't think so. But we can always find ways to adapt. And current circumstances now, and what I'm talking about, are the realization of what I've always said in my idealistic rose-colored glasses, view of things, which, by the way, you have to have rose-colored glasses if you're going to be a musician. You have to be able to see the possibilities and not ultimately get discouraged by the stupidness of the business. And we've had some stupid stuff in the business in just the past couple of days. Gig canceling, something related to a jazz festival, totally mismanaging something that we were booked on, and that not happening. And it's a stupid business. Yeah, no business like it. Well, hey. And I got so distracted by that, I forget where I was going with that. Yeah, the idealism, the rose-colored glasses, right? But, bigger, broader, esoteric truths just underlie everything for me. So I would always say, it's like, as long as you have something of value, something of substance that you could offer, there'll be a place for you. And that's true. And so I'm never deterred going forward. Right? In fact, I'm really, really encouraged on an artistic level, and otherwise. And so it's like, okay, I guess I'm going to do some senior communities again. I don't expect this to be a big part of what I do, but the senior communities, now that my musical culture is not participating in, but in this retool, I am. It's like really, really cool. I have a friend. I don't see him very often. But I saw him not that long ago, went to college with him. His wife is a very, very fine vocalist. Worked with her a lot. And they are like entirely, she in particular, in the Great American Songbook bag. and Harry and I were talking earlier this year. He says, "Yeah, uh, we went and did a gig, and I realize now it's like we're not relevant anymore. We did this gig, dance thing for a senior community, and they wanted Motown, and a few people danced to what we did, but it's like it didn't work, and I probably held my tongue, but it's like, yes, this is what had been anticipating for decades and preparing for, but there's really not a reason for, not everybody's going to just, get on the mountaintop and look at stuff. We're just going to plow ahead until, like, wait a minute. And other musicians are like, where'd the gigs go? Well, the gigs are still there, and we can still do what we do. We just have to be relevant. We just have to make connections. And I guess this relates to the story I always tell about the showboat, the sing-along in 1993. When I didn't want to do a sing-along, but I realized that the most important thing is to make the connection because I'm doing it for them. And then when you get out of that head about, that, you realize you're not changing anything. You're just realizing that people are in the room with you. And yes, changing some tunes, but it really, more than anything, I just feel like, hey, I'm back doing this. This is cool. So I'm glad to have that opened up again. So navigating the changing landscape, when I started doing this and started taking gigs in the 1970s until now, and I'm still playing a lot of the music I played back then, but certainly not exclusively, and finding ways. The opportunity at the mainstay is amazing, and the things I do at Heron Point, and the things I do with the Madeiris, and the things I do with Sharon, and the things I do otherwise, you just get to keep going. And I've always believed in me enough to keep going, enough to know that something is yet to be. And every day that proves itself true. So I apologize for those of you looking for this last night. I didn't actually announce on Facebook, just in case like it didn't work out to record this morning and I wound up skipping this week. But I really wanted to do this, so it worked. Thank you for your patience. And I'm glad it worked out this way. I'm glad I could talk about this. So I'll see you later today, maybe, or some other day. You can watch this whenever for Piano for My Friends. Thank you so much. See you soon. Timber.